Good Tuesday night. Thanks for joining us tonight on In Focus. I am Thabo Mdluli. Agriculture was one of the 6 out of 10 industries that recorded a rise in production with a growth of 6.2%. This sector believed to be one of the most effective ways to improve the lives of millions in poverty. But has the industry transformed, and are we in South Africa taking full advantage of all the opportunities provided in this sector? Here to unpack that and more, I'm joined by the Executive Director of Agri SA, Christo van der Rheede. We have agricultural economist Dr. Thulasizwe Mkhabela, the President of the Black Farmers Association of South Africa, as well as the CEO of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa with us tonight. Gentlemen, good evening. Good to have you with us on In Focus for this very important conversation. If you look at the March meeting with the Agricultural Minister and Parliament, they are raising some rather concerning issues, but one of the key areas that they raise is the low performance on land reform, which largely is supposed to be one of the key areas, in my thinking, when it comes to the transformation of this particular sector called agriculture. Do we lack the appropriate skill set to deal with the work of transforming the agricultural sector? Dr. Lennox, let's start with you. I think you're muted there. If you can unmute for us, please.
Good evening to you and the viewers. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. The agriculture, there is a problem, a big problem when it comes to transformation. Transformation is the word that is used, but there is no implementation of that transformation. And I am not going to beat around the bush. The people that are supposed to implement are not implementing. Instead, they do what we call as farmers recycling. Those that got farmers, then when it comes to transformation, they will just dilute with them. They don't bring in new farmers on board. For instance, there's a lot of land that is lying around the country. From that land, they don't give people chance to improve their skills, whereas they know that without food security, this country will die. Also, another key problem that farmers are facing, we are not supported 100% by the government. The government does not support us. When it comes, right now, there was a COVID, the relief for our farmers. Not all of them received it. And that is the problem. Yeah. Also, the people that the government put in these key places are the people that's supposed to be the key role players. But you will find out those key role players are not active, and they are not listening to the people's problems. Because we expected that as a Black Farmers Association of South Africa, FUSA, NAFU, AFASA, to be consulted by the government regularly when it comes to opportunities that are there, and also listen to our problems as the leaders of these people that we are leading. But the government makes announcements without consulting us, and we are confused. Right now, there was a statement that was made by the minister, Didiza, that she is going to give people land, the people must apply, and that we as the leaders, we were not consulted about that. So that is another problem.
Yeah. Talk to me about that particular process. In fact, the arbitrary nature of the allocation of farms in provinces as well as at district level. What are the fault lines? What is going wrong there? I mean, how is the process actually being done and decided upon who gets parcels of land?
It was supposed to be introduced to these associations that I have mentioned. But to our surprise, consulted. And we are the ones that know who needs land. Not everyone wants land. They are going to confuse the system, because you will find out what happened 2 decades ago is still happening. The people that were given land are not the people that were supposed to have received the land. They don't have the know-how. Some of them do have the know-how. They don't get the financial backup from the government. You see, so things like that, we as the leaders of this association, Ronnie Mackenzie, Mr. Matala, Jabulani Mthembu, myself as Dr. Lennox Mtshagi, we were supposed to be consulted. And after that consultation, we were supposed to go back to our people, nominate the people with the relevant skills that can add value to agriculture.
Right, let's bring Christo in here. Christo, surely you were consulted on that decision, because you did have a remark, and Agri SA issued a statement on that decision. How extensive was that consultation, and how do you feel about the actual beneficiaries saying today that they were not consulted broadly on that decision?
No, I want to make it very clear that Agri SA is not consulted on government projects and programs. This is done by the Minister and the Department of Agriculture. But I want to support Dr. Lennox, that we are too slow in terms of implementing and bringing about transformation in the agriculture sector. And the big challenge is obviously financing. We've seen the land bank struggling. The land bank has been downgraded. The land bank hasn't got any finance, and government is facing a massive challenge, because it has its own fiscal problems as well. Because you can give land to people, but if you do not provide production loans on an annual basis, then you're in serious trouble as a farmer. Now, let me just bring a bit perspective into this. 5,500 farms were distributed by government thus far. More than 4 million hectares of land were distributed. We have seen the establishment of 1,500 communal property associations, and we've seen the establishment of what they call agri parks in all of the provinces, to the tune of 3 billion rand. To what extent has black farmers benefited from that? Yeah. So on the one hand, you've got an administrative problem, you've got a financial problem, and you've got a support problem. And if we don't deal with those issues, this problem of land and dealing with the injustice of the past will just remain with us for the unforeseeable future.
What is lacking in the administration? The Auditor General flagging land administration as one of the issues. In fact, those are some of the questions that the department had to particularly go and answer to. The agricultural land holdings account in shambles, one would say, and how that particular process is being handled. Do we lack skills? Are the people who are allowed to manage that particular process not qualified enough to do it?
Remember now, government buys the land. Government then identifies beneficiaries. And Dr. Lennox is right. There's no consultation with the industry to determine who are the beneficiaries that can be on that land and who can utilize that land for production purposes. But at this point in time, government cannot tell us who rightfully has access to that land. There's no register in place. And secondly, people who are on that land are not paying rent or not honoring the rental agreements. That means that you have dished out a lot of land to beneficiaries that are not really or truly farmers in their own right. And that's a big problem, not only for black farmers, but South Africa as a whole. Because if we do not put real farmers on that land, it means we can jeopardize our food security status as a country.
Dr. Mkhabela, let's bring you in here. What is failing? Are we failing as far as leadership is concerned in this process of transforming the agricultural sector? We are just literally now focusing on exactly one pillar, and that is land reform, something that should be a priority for the department by all accounts. If you look at their performance, 37% performance on land reform reported to Parliament. Dismal.
Thank you very much, Thabo, and good evening to your listeners. I'm not going to venture into whether there's a lack of leadership or not, but I will try and explain that I think the land reform process is more complicated. There's more to it than what meets the eye. I think when promises were made and targets were set by governments, it was the complication, how complex the process is, was underestimated. I think my honest view is that probably there is a bit of being overwhelmed by the work that needs to be done, and it's very difficult to know where to start in fixing the problem. So in a nutshell, I agree that there is a problem, and I agree that it's more difficult to solve than just saying maybe there is lack of leadership or there is political will or not. But I think the bottom line is the problem we must accept is complex, and we need to involve everybody in trying to come up with a solution. I don't think government can solve it on its own, and I don't think government should try and solve it on its own. It is South African, it's a national issue. It has to be dealt and solved by South Africa.
Is the problem complex or is the system faulty? For example, you look at the land tenure system where government gives caretakership agreements of 2 years. How do they come to that decision to just give people part ownership of government land for 2 years? And the process is really unclear how they get to that.
I think it's a bit of both, Thabo, to be honest. And the issue, and in my dealing with government and talking to the people that's actually involved in this, there is an admission to say that a lot of the way that it was done previously was not the right way to do it. For example, we know that farming or agriculture is a long-term venture. You can't give somebody 2 years and think of doing anything with a piece of land. I don't care how good you are as a farmer. In 2 years, you would not have really made a meaningful impact in terms of farming. And some of the enterprises that we do are even longer than the gestation period or the waiting period before you can get any benefit out of it is longer than 2 years. So 2 years is really not a time frame that you can give to people. And I know that even the issue of the lease that is given to the beneficiaries of the land reform process has been under discussion, to say that you can't just give people 5 years or anything like that. 30 years is now considered to be the bare minimum that you can actually expect somebody to deal with it, provided there are checks and balances to make sure that the people that are on the land are doing what they are supposed to be doing in terms of putting the land under production, because 30 years is a long time if you've selected the wrong beneficiary and the people are just sitting on the parcel of land for 30 years.
Maybe also a wrong thing to do if you're going to acquire land that is already going down. But Dr. John Purchase, I'll come to you in a moment and I'll get you to respond to that. I'm joined tonight by Agri SA, the Agricultural Business Council, Dr. Mkhabela, as well as John Purchase. They'll back with you tonight on In Focus, unpacking the story of the transformation of the agricultural sector. Tonight, I'm joined by the Executive Director for Agri South Africa, Christo, Rheede, the agricultural economist, that is Dr. Thulasizwe Mkhabela, President of the Black Farmers Association of South Africa, that is Dr. Lennox, Xolile, Mtshagi, as well as the Agricultural Business Chamber CEO, Dr. John Purchase. Dr. Purchase, let me come to you. I think you're muted as well. If you can unmute, that would be really, really helpful. But, I mean, these issues have already been raised. One, failure to collect lease rentals. That's one of the basic things that you need to be able to do. A decision of giving farmers a 2-year lease. I mean, you talk about acquiring assets that are already going down. This, by their own admission, when they go to Parliament, is what has happened. How do you explain that level of failure?
Yes, good evening, and good evening to all the viewers too. I think a lot has been said around how complex it is to transform and to establish new farmers, both commercial farmers and even farmers in the communal areas, and it's a complex of reasons. And one must understand that it really is not easy. One also has to understand that you're competing in an environment where there's already surplus food. We are net exporter of food, so your food pricing is at export parity. It makes it tough to be competitive in that environment, and agriculture is capital intensive. But to get back to your point, and that's the point that Thulasizwe was making just now, is that agriculture is a long-term investment, and it's a capital-intensive investment. And what we need to do is not for government to hold leases. They can hold them for a limited period, but is to transfer property rights to farmers, or secure tenure rights, so that they can use that land to access finance. Access to finance, as Christo van der Rheede said, is a key component to agricultural production in South Africa. So that is one of the key areas. It's not the only area. Access to infrastructure, access to skills, access to technology, access to markets, all those we can expand on. But we do need a rethink on the land reform issue. Many proposals were made by the Presidential Advisory Panel that my colleague Wandile Sislobo also served on. Unfortunately, not all of those have been implemented. Some of those recommendations have been implemented, but it is too slow. I think the Minister in Parliament admitted that she sits with a problem in her department in terms of executing land reform efficiently. I think that is why the President in the SONA, you will remember, he indicated that the government is wanting to establish a land reform agency to speed up land reform. In other words, provide allocate or delegate certain functions from the department to this land reform agency to speed up land reform. Exactly how that will work, we're not quite sure. We have been privy to some of the developments on the terms of reference, but certainly we need to speed up the establishment of new farmers in South Africa, both in the communal areas and in the commercial areas. I think everybody agrees that transformation has been too slow. I think even from private sector side, we have established, for example, the Agricultural Development Agency, known as AGDA. And I know there are other initiatives also from private sector to also speed up the process, because even from private sector side, it's in the interest of establishing black farmers. I think the master plan that we're busy trying to negotiate, with its own complications and challenges, is also there to provide a roadmap or a framework where government, all the social partners, government, private sector, emerging agribusinesses or developing agriculture, and labour also try and map a way forward so that we have a common vision in terms of developing agriculture in South Africa.
I'm going to come to the cannabis master plan in a moment, because I can see Dr. Lennox itching to jump in on that one. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the support derived from government and the benefits derived from government. One of the support programs is called the Land Development Support, the LDS of 2018-2019. Initially, the department decides we're going to take this money. It's going to be managed by the commodity groups. And Treasury says, hold up, that's not a good idea. Take the money and give it to private banks. Let them handle that particular process because it was plagued with low expenditure and irregular expenditure. Is this the correct way to derive meaningful benefit for black farmers? Dr. Thulasizwe?
I'm not sure if one would say that's the best way to deal with it. Suffice to say that there is urgent need to actually support the land development itself, the development of the land itself. But I think what we have done for the past 20 odd years is that we've developed the land more than developing the farmers, the people themselves, which then you can have the best land, but if the skill transfer and capacity building has not taken place, you run the risk of having a resource without a driver. So I am more in support of balancing the two. As you develop the land, you develop the person, the farmer. So it's both farm and farmer development. For me, that's the key. And I'm not sure if giving it to private banks is the way to go, but I'm sure there are merits to each and every of the approaches that may be used. But I think also you want to capacitate the farmer themselves to be able to handle farming as a business. So the idea of going through the bank then also inculcates that business acumen in the farmer to say that this is a business, that the money, even if it's a grant from government, there must be a criteria and I must qualify to actually get the money that the support that I'm being provided for. So for me, there's an element of that, but there's also an element of making sure that farmers, especially new entrants into the business, are given the opportunity to handle finances so that they can learn how to handle money as business people. I think that would be my response to what you've just asked.
Dr. Lennox, what was wrong with the land development support, with it sitting with the commodity groups, and how did you feel about the decision to move it to the banks?
We are not happy about that. And what we are asking the minister to do is to pay the money direct to the associations instead of paying the money to total strangers of the game. Because what is going to happen, they are going to frustrate us because they want to generate interest on the money, and then they will send you pillar to post, and then you end up losing all the opportunities that were at your doorstep. So our advice to the government is to really look at that. And the government, when they coming with these decisions, and that they should first engage with the farmers. You cannot make a decision for farmers. Include us. Let us be part of that decision. Let us have a collective decision as farmers, and we are not going to point fingers at the government. Once we agree on those are things that I think our government is lacking about, is not to consult us as farmers, you know. So each and every time we must do damage control. Damage control costs a lot of time and money. I think our government, if they are listening to this, they must come to the people, consult the people. Don't consult the people when it's time to vote. Consult us. We are working together to come with an amicable solution in all these problems. For instance, there are people that are within the government that don't have a know-how of farming, but they are in the agriculture sector. Those are the people that the government needs to relook when they appoint people that have the passion to farm. You cannot put anybody there because of, you know, him or her from school. Put the right people in right places.
Yeah. Christo, what did the commodity organization indicate was the challenge with the land development support? Why the low expenditure? And of course, reports of irregular expenditure as well from the Auditor General.
Let me start with the following. One, it is not land that produces food. It is expertise that produces food. The idea that we're going to create millions of farmers is an absolute crazy idea. It's like saying that we're going to create millions of pilots or millions of heart surgeons. Agriculture is a science. You need to have extensive training, at least a 3 to 4 year degree or a diploma or a certificate in farming. Then you'll have to attend or become a farm worker or a specialist worker. You have to have a career within the broader agricultural context, and ultimately you then in a position to say, right, I've got the skills to become a farmer. And that should be the focus. We must move away from this political notion that we can create millions of farmers in South Africa. We must come back to the economic reality and make sure that those farmers that are already farming, and there's enough black, colored, and Indian farmers that are very, very good farmers. And we need to identify them. We need to give them the necessary support. Many of the black farmers that I know personally, on an annual basis, they plead with me, can't government just extend the lease? I mean, a 5-year lease on a piece of land where you want to establish an orchard that will only produce fruit after 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, that doesn't make any sense. So the plan should be economically viable and not politically inspired. And that's the big challenge that our commodity organizations face. Remember, our commodity organizations do a lot of good. Grain SA has established 10,000 grain farmers. The wool growers have established 4,000 black farmers that are already exporting wool overseas. And then you've got Hotgrow as well as Windpro, as well as the citrus growers. They've got their own canopy the academy that train these farmers. So these things are already happening. So yes, commodity organizations are in a very good space to do that, but we need to look at other options. In other words, there's the skills levy. There's about 600 million that is annually paid to the Agri sector. The big question is, how do we use that money to make sure that the training that we provide is effective? There's approximately 700 million that's paid in terms of statutory levies. How is that used for research purpose, for development purpose, to fight all the biosecurity challenges that the country faces in terms of foot and mouth and all kinds of other diseases? And how do you use that money also for the supply development? But one thing that I want to put on the table tonight is the Agri BE fund. Now that fund exists. It's supported by a treasury. But how do we grow that fund so that it includes your new farmers of primary agriculture as well as secondary agriculture? And I think there sits an opportunity for us. We try to promote Agri BE in the agri sector, which is very complex and very difficult. And I think there's an easier way out where a white farmer, for example, can make a contribution to the Agri BE fund. That money can sit there with, without all the red tape that normally comes with funds that are made available by your commercial banks. And that is the kind of cheap financing, blended financing that we require to establish black farmers. So we need to become more innovative in the space, and we need to take into cognizance the aspirations of black farmers. Because as long as we are denying that or trying to sweep that under the carpet, the issue of land reform, the issue of establishment of black farmers will continue to haunt us.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. You're back with us. We are with Dr. John Purchase, Dr. Lennox Mtshagi, as well as Dr. Thulasizwe Mkhabela and Christo van Rheede, and we're talking the transformation of the agricultural sector. Dr. Purchase, interesting things being raised. What's clear to me, though, is that there is no shortage of programs, but there are some irrational decisions that tend to be made. For example, Christo raises the question of research, right? Question of teaching the art or the discipline of farming, agriculture is something that needs to be learned, you can go to school for. But you see budget cuts to the ARC and to Honest Report, and you think, how do we reach that kind of a decision?
Yes, I think that government support for agriculture is dwindling, but we must also remember that agriculture is generally performing pretty well. 13% growth last year, and we expect probably 6-7% again this year. Global prices are fairly good, and then also we've had two to three now fairly good seasons. So agriculture is not performing badly in terms of the economy. It's probably one of the best performing sectors in the economy, and is often anti-cyclical. So it's not all doom and gloom in agriculture. We also have a strong positive trade balance, which is continuing to grow. So we are competitive in many of the value chains that we have in South Africa, and we do have good technology companies. But we do lack in certain areas. I absolutely agree that we need greater support for research and innovation, for extension, for farmer support. We need blended financing models. I think that was the reallocation of that money or funds that you were talking about. We believe that the blended finance model is a very good model, especially now with the land bank in diaspora. We do need to have specific models for what we call agricultural development finance. The blended finance is going to assist with that, but won't solve all the problems. The problem is the fiscus is in trouble, and the government just don't have the means to plug all the holes in terms of what has to be done. Yeah. And this is why private sector is stepping up to the plate and is trying to assist where they can, creating their own funds and creating their own projects through AGDA, through the Agricultural Development Agency, and their other initiatives as well. Try and assist through the commodity organizations. Christo mentioned very many very good examples on those initiatives. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Definitely not. I think from private sector side, we are certainly assisting a lot. I think one of the big things is the fragmentation of transformation is not being on the same page between government and private sector. And this creates a lot of problems. We need more coordinated programs between private sector and government, and this is our big challenge now.
What does it mean, Dr. Lennox, for black farmers in your organization to not be able to go to the ARC or to OBP because just infrastructure is dilapidated, that they can't fund certain things? I mean, in the 10, 15 years that I covered agriculture, I know how important those institutions were. In fact, they were national key points for emerging farmers because they could be able to take their product there. If there is particular disease on the crop, they could be able to get immediate assistance and answers. With those institutions being poorly funded, where do they go?
It is a problem for black farmers, and the problem is these institutions that we're talking about, they are not there when we want them. They are not there. A bizarre, recently, I think it's 2 or 3 months back in the Western Cape, there was a swine flu. Our members were paid a compensation of 100 rand per pig. Where can you buy a pig for 100 rand? All those things are things that are engineered or by those that are still living in the past to frustrate black people, especially in the Western Cape. And those things are frustrating big time because each and every time we engage them, they say people don't come to us and address these things and all that. But when we hear these stories, as a sitting president of the Black Farmers Association, people coming to me and showing me that they were paid 100 rand for a sow and all that. And when we ask the officials, where can they buy a piglet for 100 rand? They can't even show you, That is why I say our government need to look back who they are putting in charge of this office of agriculture. And besides that, the very same thing that is happening in agriculture, it is happening with the cannabis. Our cannabis is gone from black people, it's in the hands of the white people. And the office of SAPRA, Dr. Boitumelo Simete, said in her affidavit, she does not take black people serious. So what good can come out of that office? Dololo, 0, nothing will come out there for black people. Also, what is happening there at SAPRA right now, they are busy issuing licenses to foreign companies that are not even from South Africa. That is corruption at its level best. Our preamble of the Constitution stipulates clear that those that were oppressed, previously disadvantaged, should be prioritized in all business of the government. Yeah. But the licenses that are issued, there's no BEE in those licenses.
Why do you think SAPRA has backtracked on the decision to give you pre-licenses?
No, what we picked up with SAPRA is corruption on top of corruption. And we are not going to fold our hands and say, it's fine, carry on. The president said in the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, he is going to root out corruption from all state-owned entities. We want the president to be there on the 19th of October when we are marching to remove Professor Helen Rheede and Dr. Boitumelo, because what they are doing, they are taking our indigenous plants, giving it to white foreign companies at our cost. We cannot sit back and watch that. There's not even a single person from Pondoland that has got a license. Not a single monarch that has got a license. But these foreign companies are given licenses at the expense of black people, by black people, And also, Professor Helen Rheede has been with SAPRA since 1995. What is she doing there? That is a SOE. The office term is for 5 years for all state-owned entities. She's been there for more than that as a board chairperson. That is not right. We want the president to step in. On the 19th of October, we will be marching to remove Helen Rhys and Professor Boitumelo from office for undermining black people and also for putting red tape for black people not to access their own indigenous plants. We've got a lot of people that are healing people with these indigenous cannabis. Rastafarians are not even mentioned. Even those that fought for these cannabis today, they are sitting with nothing. Those that were sitting on the other side of the fence are being given licenses, and it's foreign companies.
Yeah.
You know?
Dr. Mkhabela, the slow process of the policy making aspect of things also come into play here. I mean, for example, this very same issue of the issuing of licenses on cannabis farming, but the other question on the communal land tenure policy that is still not tabled, that was due to be tabled in 2020, just how these processes are dragging to get to the finality. What are the bottlenecks?
The problem.
Lennox, I'm going to come to you. Dr. Thulasizwe, come in.
Yeah, no, thank you. I will start with the issue of land tenure, especially communal land. And again, my favorite phrase is that it's a complicated process. There are vested interests in terms of a communal land. You can't just willy-nilly wake up and make a policy that says people that own communal land now have got title deeds to those pieces of land. Because then it brings the issue of what is the role of the monarchs, the role of the traditional leaders, and where does that place them? So it's not as easy as most people say. And I also venture to say that title deed is not a panacea to all the problems that rural people face. There are other ways where you can actually be creative in terms of making sure that there's security of tenure without necessarily giving a title deed to a person in the communal land. So that issue of communal land and tenure reform in that space, in my view, is going to take longer than most of us think it will, because there will be a pushback from traditional leaders that will actually feel that they are being stripped of the power that they have in terms of governing the land that they hold in trust of the people. Because most traditional leaders are aware they don't own the land. They are holding it in trust of the people. But then it's a whole issue of changing institutions and say, how do we then bring about change that is acceptable to both parties, that is the people and the leadership that is in place in those areas. I think that's the biggest challenge with that issue. When it comes to policy making, I think it is very important for policymakers to work hand in hand with the people that they are enacting policies for. I think gone are the time where you can just sit in parliament and think that you know what is best for the people. So consultation, which I know it's done, is very important, but the consultation must be meaningful. It must give voice to all stakeholders equally, regardless of how much power and status they have in society. So policy making, in short, for me, has to be evidence-based. You need to be addressing a felt need by the people and actually bring a solution because you've thoroughly researched it and consulted in terms of policy making. And the policy must be implementable, because it's all well and good to make a policy or formulate policy, but when it comes to implementation, it becomes an issue. Land reform is a policy, we know, but how are we implementing it? That's another story. Thank you.
We come to you when we continue next to some of the messages sent through on social media tonight. And of course, we wrap up this conversation with some of the key steps we need to take as a way forward with our panel tonight. Stay within Focus on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. We're back in a moment.
They must stop it. You know, recently there was an accident in the Western Cape. Farm laborers were loaded on a trailer of a truck. And there was an accident. I think 9 of them died on the spot. You know, they don't value lives of the laborers. They need to value the lives of the laborers. That is what I want to say on behalf of FUSA and Black Farmers Association of South Africa.
Let's get a reaction now on Twitter from our viewers tonight to the conversation going. Malume on Twitter saying there's no farming without land. Land first, the rest will follow at Newzroom 405. Noni saying they asked people to apply for farms earlier this year, but no feedback. The minister not coming on air to tell the public where the process is. Communication non-existent. We did extend an invitation to the minister tonight. She is, of course, caught up in some meetings and couldn't be on with us. We need serious rules and changes from the norm, Thabo. I do poultry and I tell you best and healthy chicks are only given to white commercial farmers, and that applies to feed also. There are prices for blacks and prices for whites. Thus, we can't compete. That's Vince Chipu there on Twitter. That's the view tonight coming through from the viewers listening to this conversation. Dr. Mkhabela, let me give you the final word here, particularly on being able to derive value for money on the land reform process and the farms that we need to acquire.
Thank you very much, Thabo. I think in closing, we've been, as a panel, saying that agriculture is a science and it's a business. And the same goes for land acquisition. The land that is being acquired by the government, being bought from farmers, first of all, it has to undergo scientific evaluation in terms of what is it suitable for? Is it land that if you give it to a person, the person can actually make a living out of it? So for us, even in the IRC, we've developed a methodology that looks at evaluating a farm, taking the natural resources, taking everything, and then determining what should be the value of that land and what is the potential for that land that is being acquired. Instead of just of buying any piece of land that is available, that is being sold, and then you give it up, you give it to people, especially new players in the agricultural sector. In my view, you're setting them up to fail if you're giving them land that is not up to par, that does not have the potential. Because even if the person has got the best ability and the willingness to learn, if the land or the natural resources are a limiting factor, you will still be limited. You cannot go beyond what the land can produce and can give to you.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time.
So in short, it's very important. Sorry?
Let's leave it there. We're completely out of time. But thank you very much for that input and your interventions tonight. Dr. Lennox, Dr. Mkhabela, Dr. Purchase, and Christo Rheede with us tonight. And thank you for your contribution.